Welcome to Rethink You, bringing you ideas, inspiration, and motivation to start living the life you were created to live. Here is your host, author, trainer, speaker, and coach, and founder of Rethink You, Kim Levings.
Well, hello, and welcome back to the Rethink You podcast. I'm excited to continue our theme today around leadership. But before I tell you about today's speaker, I would encourage you to please subscribe to our channel on YouTube or subscribe and review the podcast on your favorite podcast channel. I love to share people's stories, and I hope that you are enjoying listening to this feed. And if you are, tell others via your review. Also, be sure to check out rethinkyou.com and kimlevings.com. Specifically kimlevings.com, which is where my business and leadership consulting lives. Many of the tools that I have on there are specifically for leaders. So if you're looking to have a bit of a refresh on your own leadership development, or perhaps with a team, or even your organizational culture, go and visit kimlevings.com and perhaps drop me a line. I'm always open to having a conversation to see how I can help you. So let me tell you about today's speaker. Dr. Brad Smith is president of the Bakke Graduate University, which has students, faculty, and alumni in over 65 countries. I am blessed to have known Brad for, I figured it out today, 25 years, since we first met during a Leadership Training Network project when Brad was still with Leadership Network out of Dallas. And I learned a lot from Brad then, working on projects, and we've continued to stay in touch. Dr. Smith also serves as the chairman of the Global Institute of Leadership, which provides peer training and coaching for leaders of 142 National Evangelical Alliances within the World Evangelical Alliance. Previously, Dr. Smith has served as the assistant to 2 U.S. senators and a congressman. He started spiritual formation programs at Dallas Seminary, planted an urban church, and served as president of Leadership Network, which provided peer learning programs for leaders of large churches. Dr. Smith is married to Debbie and has 3 college-age and early career children. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy my conversation with Dr. Brad Smith. Well, welcome back. Here I am with Dr. Brad Smith. And as I mentioned, we have known each other for a long time. And Brad, we met many years ago, and you were one of those people who had a key influence on my understanding, not just of leadership, but also of collaborative creativity. And I was so looking forward to our conversation today. So welcome, and thank you for being part of it.
Well, Kim, thanks for inviting me on. And I've always enjoyed being with you. And so it's been fun to get to know you a little bit after a few years of not talking. So it's just fun to be reacquainted.
Wonderful. Thanks, Brad. Yeah, we're going to be getting into some amazing topics. I was blown away to see everything that you've been doing in the last 25 years and the applications and concepts that you bring to the table. And I know people are really going to enjoy this. So I also know that the Rethink You listeners like to know how people start out, because not everybody starts out in the position that they're on. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your early upbringing and how you found leadership, or did leadership find you? How did you end up in this lane?
Sure. Well, thank you, Kim. So I actually, when I was growing up, I ended up going to 6 different junior highs in high school, and including moving my senior year, which was both stressful, but it also helped form something just by the nature of having difficulty of having to move so much. And so I think that was both a negative experience, but also a positive experience for toughness. I also was an athlete, a swimmer, and to compete in swimming, you have to swim 3, sometimes 4 hours a day, plus weightlifting and other things. And those are both things that were formational. My family was a very good mom and dad. And so I think that was also key for that. For me, though, in terms of where I think as a leader, I really began to see that formed into, especially a lot more, was when I went to college. I kind of accidentally stumbled into a student government at a school called Texas A&M University. And it just so happened it was, I think, the largest student government in the world at that point. And they gave the student government $3 million to distribute all the student services fees. And serving 4 years in that, I was mentored a lot by the different people inside the school. And I know a lot of the studies on leadership talk about being mentored at an early age, being mentored throughout your 20s and early 30s. And I would say for me, that's a major part of my life.
Wow, that's interesting, Brad. And I know too that you talk about one of your core themes of leadership being around spiritual foundation or formation. Do you think that that was the genesis of that from your own experience? And, I know that for our listeners, we're speaking specifically to the Christian believers right now as we talk about spiritual formation and our gifts. And I know you've done significant work in how our giftedness and our calling is a critical part of discerning God's will in our lives. So tell us more about that theme, and was it because of your own experience? Talk to us a little, however much you want to share about your own spiritual formation.
I think in terms of spiritual formation, if for those that are perhaps not of the Christian faith, that definition is going to be a little bit different, but it's going to be about finding something inside of yourself that maybe is not the material, it's not the obvious. And I think for anybody of any faith, the process of going through difficulties and challenges and having other people help you, having something you find inside of yourself that you didn't know was there, I think that's an important part of the idea of spiritual formation. Specifically in the Christian faith, spiritual formation is often around understanding who God is and who you're not, and how to build trust in God. And so leading spiritual formation programs at the seminary where I attended, a lot of it was just helping people to understand just the goodness of God and trusting the goodness of God in new ways. And so that's been all part of being formed. So I think for me, it's been a lot through the trials and difficulties, and then also being in community and having mentors that help me through that. And there's something about that that gives you a fiber, a texture, that gives you a confidence at various levels that is important to being formed as a leader and being formed in your own spirit.
Right. And Brad, I know that you've, some Christians who are listening will say, well, gee, I know what my spiritual gifts are, so off I go. And I know from my neuroscientific coaching and the breakthroughs we've had in how our brain develops, that you're not cooked and baked in a final product. Your spiritual gifts can change, and your formation can kind of follow the journey of your life in some ways. Talk to us a little about that and how you would address it if somebody feels that they have their gifts and they're good to go.
Of course, Kim, you've sat into these giftedness conversations for so many years. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times when the term spiritual gift is used, it is actually a term out of the New Testament of the Bible. And it really does have a little bit different meaning than natural gifts. So in the way that it's meant in the Bible, spiritual gift is something that God either provides in uniquely or empowers a natural gift for the use of building up other people. And it's kind of supernatural. And so the way to discern a spiritual gift is also looking for a supernatural. When do you have results of something you've done that's beyond what it makes sense for you? You may be good, but you're not that good. Or right. when do you find your motive unusually pure? Something is happening there that's not just natural. Or when do you find you learn and you grow and you find yourself and you connect with people at higher levels that you can't just explain naturally? So in a New Testament Bible term, spiritual gift is really something that is almost empowered from the outside from God. A natural gift, though, is something that is typically formed when you're born. You don't have it revealed at that point. So there's the process that's called Systems for Identifying Motivated Abilities. It comes out of Bernard Haldane's work, and even before that, some other people. The idea behind it is each of us has certain motivations that are perhaps narrower than we thought, but they're stronger to who we are. And also we have certain abilities that we just see over and over again. And that's a natural gift. So meaning that you are born with these, but they're going to be shaped in your environment. They're going to be shaped. And of course, there's the whole nature and nurture debate. Are we born a blank slate and then something is written on us? I don't personally believe that. I think we are born in nature with some pretty determined gifts. However, our culture shapes that and our environment shapes that. Choices we make shape that. So the idea behind natural gifts and the way that the SEMA, the System for Identifying Motivated Abilities, and the Bernard Haldane approach before that, is they would say, okay, let's look for stories. What did you enjoy doing, and what did you do well, ages 5 to 10? Write down some stories if you can remember those. Ages 10 to 15, ages 15 to 20. And then out of those, select 7, 8, 9 stories that really portray what you enjoy doing and what you did well. Now, even if your friends go, they didn't reward you for that, or your parents didn't get it, that's not what you're looking for. What did you personally think you enjoyed doing and did well? And then you start asking questions about those stories. And the questions typically are, and you can't observe the pattern in yourself. You have to have other people observe it, and there's professionals that listen, but you can also do it in groups of 3. We do it all over the world. And people love to hear each other's stories, especially stories about what they enjoy doing and did well. There always are energetic stories. Mm-hmm. So you ask the question, how did you get involved? And were you pulled in by a mentor? Did you see a problem you wanted to solve? Was a challenge given to you? Did something happen in your head? It's like, whoa, I have this idea and I have to do something with it. And there's a whole bunch of ways that there's patterns of how people get started in something they did well and enjoy doing. Then you ask the question, what'd you do? And it's interesting when you listen to somebody's story, they don't realize it, but they're using very consistent words and very consistent patterns. They don't see that in themselves. But if you're taking notes, you're saying they keep using these same words over and over again. And even though they don't see it, there's a pattern. They seem to have certain abilities that are always present in these activities. Then the next question is, how did you know you finished it? If it's a project, or in some cases it's a process, so that question may not be as pertinent. And you ask that, what did you like least about this story? And then what did you like best about the story? And you do that through 7, 8 stories. An observer who's listening well, writing notes, will see amazing patterns, but the person actually telling them won't. And then when you convey back, here's what I see, they're going, well, of course, everybody's like that. And then you go, well, no, and actually that we're telling you, we're giving you words for what you already know. If it's something that's a total surprise, then maybe I didn't take good notes. But having the words to know how to describe your motivated abilities gives you power to make decisions, to convey what you do well. And even though it may be something you already knew, those words actually empower you in a new way. And again, a fish has a difficulty describing water. A person has sometimes difficulty understanding their gifts and motivations. And that process, either at a professional level or even at just a community of friends level, is so strong in helping people to understand who they are and who they're not.
Wonderful. Brad, I love the way you unpack that, because there's a whole lot more than just spiritual gifts. I know that in the work that I do, I introduce people to the difference between spiritual gifts and those natural inborn talents. And it's interesting you mentioned that, because I do a timeline of people's history, and I'm like, I take it from a slightly different angle. But when you said that, I smiled, and I'm like, you mean I didn't invent that? Somebody had already invented it, right? As they say, there's nothing new under the sun. Yeah, so it's important about giftedness, but it also sort of stumbles on the fact that one of the unintended but positive outcomes of me starting this podcast was just listening to people's stories and how that surfaces people's passions. And then people listening realize, wow, maybe I'm not alone in dealing with that challenge, or that's a strength in me, but I never realized it was a strength, and understand that. And then and I'm going to throw you a curveball, because, for the listeners to know, I give the guests a great outline and then I just go completely off script.
And I'm okay with that.
But here's a curveball, because I know there's also the whole Strengths Finder, the Gallup Strengths Finder process. And people say, well, you shouldn't focus on weaknesses, but you should rather focus on developing strengths. And I said, I sort of swim the middle road on that, in that if something is a weakness and it's hindering your ability to do what you're meant to do, then I think you should address it. What are your thoughts in terms of resonance, if there is any resonance, or is there just a wide delta between strengths and natural gifts?
So we used a little different format. And so we did work, as you know, with the Strength Finders research back in the 90s. My goodness, it's been forever.
Been a long time.
And it has some base in the Bernard Haldane research, by the way, which is interesting. So we would say you have strengths. Those are things that you have a natural ability to do, and probably that's exhibited from early memories. Now that's developed or not developed in certain ways. Those are your strengths. The next category are your limits, the things you're really just not good at. And it doesn't mean that you're a less person. It's just something that you're not particularly good at. So for example, I'm very good at starting things and getting ideas going, but I have a limit when it comes to details, and really following up at a level. I follow up on projects, but really spending a lot of motivated times into little details for me is a limit. Other people are really gifted at it. I'm just amazed at it. You can lock me in a room and try to make me do that, and I'm just going to have a hard time with it at certain levels. Now, there's certain details I really get energized by, and that's looking at how I'm motivated. So I have to create systems to overcome those limits. And I create tools, I create processes to help me stay focused and help me do the details I need. But I still am not, it's a limit rather than a strength. Then there's what we would call weaknesses. And the term weakness is probably something that you have made poor choices. It could be an addiction, a habit, a hang up that's not helpful. Perhaps something that's happened in your environment. And a weakness is often something that is, it's not a limit and it's not a strength. It's something that has damaged you by others or you've damaged yourself. We all have that, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, sometimes it's out of the weaknesses that we find our greatest spiritual strength. And nobody doesn't have weaknesses. And then the final area is obstacles or challenges that, and of course, we work internationally. A lot of times if somebody has a certain set of gifts in the United States, they have a huge amount of opportunities to use those gifts versus if they are in Myanmar, they may not have those because of challenges and obstacles. So the gifts will be used differently. So we would say developing yourself as a leader, ideally, you want to spend most of your time working on your strengths. However, nobody gets 100% job fit with their strengths. And so where that's necessary, recognize your limits. Think about it as you're motivated to do certain things, but when you do other things, you lose motivation. Recognize that, know that's true. Those things have to be done. So create systems, create times of the day that you can work in unmotivated areas, but also look around to say, how do I build a staff so that my limits are now basically complemented by somebody else who has strengths where I have limits. And ideally, as you grow as a leader, you're looking for how can I identify my strengths and my limits? How do I help identify other people's strengths and limits? And how do I hire complementary people that their strengths are my limits? And then also, how am I authentically and honest about my weaknesses and my challenges? Not to hide them. And of course, there's some, there's areas where it's appropriate and not appropriate, and see them as something that's beneficial to me, not just something that limits me or has created. Sometimes my mistakes are the very thing that helps me to move forward with just a new energy and a new strength.
Right. And it's such an important point, Brad, because I was just recently saying how, trust is built on the platform of transparency. And that transparency is claiming your weaknesses, because if you walk around trying to act like Mr. or Miss Perfect, it's a surefire way to undermine the respect of a team. And then I think I may well have learned it from you or one of the LTN team back in the day about, work to strengthen, staff to weakness, recognize where you're not good, and then staff to that if you're able to. I give that advice to entrepreneurs right now, saying if you can't be the doer of all significant things because your business is limited by your level of competence. So you need to find the people to do the things that you don't know how to do well.
Not to be afraid of your weaknesses, I think. So,
Yeah.
And I'll go off a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's important. So the Christian Bible has 2 chapters at the beginning in Genesis 1 and 2 that describe life in the garden, Adam and Eve. Right. And then chapter 3, they ate a pomegranate or whatever it was, and then bad stuff happens. But then there's 2 chapters at the end of the Bible in Revelation that are the 2 chapters when everything is restored to what it was like in the garden, but now it's in the city. Okay. And then when Jesus is on earth, he talks about the kingdom. And that's a weird word for us in our modern day, but it's basically saying it's the state of the garden or the city in a world that is still messed up and having troubles. And so the idea behind that, and we kind of imagine what would have been like in the garden or in the kingdom or in the New Jerusalem is what they describe it in the end of Revelation. So let's say Adam and Eve are walking around and they have no moral failures. And so they are building something, and they're building a building. And so they talk the elephant, because back then, according to the garden, the elephant would go, sure, I'll lift that log over here. And the tigers would kind of scratch something over, but the thing collapsed. So at the end of the day, it talks about that God would walk in the cool of the garden and talk to them. And so now they're having a conversation. So Adam and Eve are saying to God, oh, I mean, we messed up today. We tried to build this thing, it collapsed, and it just didn't work out at all. Think about this conversation. There's no shame, because that is articulated in the first part of Genesis. So what's happening is it's all about learning. It's all about education. And so God says, well, what about this? Or have you thought about putting a pillar in the middle of that might help it? Oh, that's an amazing idea. So notice every failure or problem that occurred in the garden, New Jerusalem, and this kingdom idea is not about being shamed for that. It's actually a learning or an education opportunity. So one would say, as a leader, how do I get to that mindset myself, but also in my organization? How do I create a culture that is not a shaming culture, but actually we would say your failure, your mistake, something that didn't turn out the way you desired it to turn out, is a wonderful learning opportunity, kind of envisioning what it would have been like for Adam and Eve and what the Christians would believe it to be like in the future, and how we can display that in our organizations and our lives today. So the idea of a weakness, that where I've made a mistake in the past, what an amazing opportunity to learn and to be a stronger person as a result of it. And when somebody else fails or has a mistake or whatever, to say, okay, that happens. What do we learn from that? How do I encourage you to learn from that? And how do I learn from your mistake? And then eventually, when I make mistakes, you learn from my mistakes. It changes the nature of looking at mistakes and problems to being learning opportunities, not things for reasons for shame.
So good, Brad. And you're right. I mean, at the root of it is the shame and the guilt and the self-deprecation, and all of those things are not in the garden as we know it. And those are sort of man-made events. And I actually also had an additional thought. I want to sort of point back to what you said about there's, we've got these two different thoughts. One is that you're born with a blank slate, and the other one is that, you come with some stuff. I think that the blank slate theory is probably being debunked by the advance of epigenetic research and other things, saying there's certain things that are stamped in you rightly or wrongly. The rightly is God's fingerprints on you, and, wrongly are some of literally the sins of the fathers coming forward in the genes. But okay, I know that we can go.
There's always going to be that argument. There's always going to be arguments on both sides. So
yeah,
whether it's debunked or not, there's always going to be that.
There's going to be something
that we find, because we work cross-culturally. And of course, we utilize things like the Enneagram, the DISC, the Myers-Briggs. All of those things are utilized, but we see them as the beginning of a conversation, not a box to put you in, because I think that's damaging.
Yeah.
However, stories crosses cultures in really unique ways. And so what I described the process early is stories to reveal your natural gifts and motivations. What did you do well? What did you enjoy doing? We also have another storytelling exercise that helps you understand how has your environment shaped you. So we've got to consider that as well. And so what we do is we use a lifeline or a life map, and you've probably heard different ways of doing that. Lifeline is kind of like a stock, up, down, up, down. And we look at, how's your emotional health, circumstances, spiritual health, whatever you want to track, and you tell stories. Another one is a life map, which you can do more creative, a tree and different branches or different parts of your life. And one branch is full of buds and the other branch is dead. And, just depending on how you want to describe it, but you tell a story. And then you're listening for, what are the high times? What really was just a great experience for me? What are the hard times? What are the heroes? What are the heritage that I gained that I see from my background? And then we also add hand of God times. When do we see something that happened that we just can't explain except for something was guiding us? And when you tell those stories, high times, hard times, heroes, heritage, and hand of God, it allows you through stories to begin to see the environment, how you're shaped by the environment. And so we find that the motivated ability stories and these more environmental stories together helps kind of shape both how we're born, but also how the environment around us has shaped us.
That's fabulous. And Brad, as you were speaking, it reminded me, I know I want to go into the cross-cultural leadership aspect, but when you say we do, are you speaking about Bakke as a graduate school? When, what are you talking about as to who's using these tools and how are you using them? Do you want to just speak to that for a moment in terms of what you mean by we?
Okay. So Bakke Graduate University is a graduate university with master's programs and doctoral programs. We have students and alumni and faculty in 65 nations. And so it's used as part of our program. The whole idea of helping people find their calling and their gifts. And so if we say, what is our value proposition to students? Is we help people find their gifts and calling and define that in their process. We also help them see the work of God in the world bigger. And it's not just studying about the world, we study with the world. Most of our classes have at least 8 time zones. They're hybrid. So a lot of them, we've been doing Zoom for 6 years, Skype before that. I mean, we've been doing that. But we also we fly people to cities and have immersions, best practice immersions and other things. And then we also have mentoring and then cohorts. And we have 3 colleges, a college of business, a college of urban studies, and a college of Christian theology. And everybody has to study with each other. And so, but the idea behind our value proposition is we help you see what God is doing in the world bigger. We help you understand kind of your own gifts and calling in a more concrete way. And then we help connect the two with practical skills and a degree. And we have found that the whole giftedness is so part of leader formation, is understanding gifts, including understanding how your weaknesses have shaped your spirit and given your spiritual health a strength.
Hi there, it's Kim. And I wanted to just stop by and say, I hope that you're enjoying this episode. If you are, please be sure to like, review, and subscribe, whether you're on a podcast feed or the YouTube channel. As you know, putting out media takes time and effort, and we live for subscribers and reviews. So if you think this is a great podcast, please tell the world about us and be sure to subscribe. Thank you. Now let's get back to today's interview. Wow, that's fascinating, because I know that we more than ever are becoming like a global village, because technology has really broken down the walls. And then I think the pandemic really was a significant shift in culture across the world. What have you seen has been the impact of, if at all, on your work, but on the world at large, of the pandemic? But specifically, what does this mean for cross-cultural leadership? What is different about leadership as you look at cross cultures?
Well, there's 2 different questions. And so
sorry, I'm very good at asking complex questions.
So from the pandemic, I think it has been, for some people, kind of a wake-up call. I have to get involved in technology in a different way. And I think a lot of people avoided technology, saying, well, you can't build friends over the internet. You can't really learn anything. You can't connect and have community over the internet. I think they've discovered if you do the internet right, if you do Zoom or whatever you're using, Signal, WhatsApp right, you actually can. But it's a different, and so like we've been doing this for a lot of years. We've had a lot of universities come to us and say, show us how to go online. We have to now. And we would say the technology piece is about 2%. It's totally changing how a faculty member engages a class. You can't do 45-minute lectures on Zoom. That's just ridiculous. You have to go in 5, 10-minute, 15-minute segments at the max with engagement. It's just a totally different approach, but it actually can have more strength because you engage their ownership, you engage their excitement. But if you try to do it on Zoom the way you did it in a classroom, there's no way that it's going to be effective. So we've tried to train, but we realized that a lot of people that have been in the teaching, training world are used to seeing people face to face. This has forced them to try to learn some new skills or hope that it all go back to normal again, which I don't believe that's going to happen. So I think for us, it actually opened up an opportunity for us to share what we've learned, with others and try to help and equip them to also be a part of that. So that's the pandemic piece of it.
In fact, yeah. And before you go to the second question, I was going to point out how accurate you are, because as a trainer and facilitator myself, I said, I haven't left the house in 18 months, but I haven't stopped teaching. And I actually have mastermind groups with people around the world. So, there's 4 of us that are all coaches and consultants. And one of them is on the East Coast. I'm here in the Midwest. Somebody's in Paris. The other one is in Berlin, in Germany. And the 4 of us meet once a month for the most fabulous mastermind group, talk about cross-culture. And of course, I come from Africa. So as you were saying, well, what I've seen is that the walls are breaking down. This whole, oh, we're all in different countries and we have to fly around has completely changed. And I think for the better. But sorry. So to the next question.
So today, just to underline that, so this morning, I started off with a conversation with Sri Lanka, included a conversation Israel, had a conversation in the Philippines, trying to think what else we've had. Oh, I had a conversation in New Zealand. And so that's just, and then we also had Kenya as well, a group in Africa, but Central Africa. That's all in one day, and exciting. So, and I learn and grow and make a lot of cross-cultural mistakes, but that's the kind of where the world is heading. And a lot of people are doing that. And it's just a constant growing and learning, and we are a global village. But I think the pandemic has helped us to understand that and be better at it.
Yes, absolutely. So let's go to the cross-cultural. As we said, now I've sort of been jumping around. I have to sort of look at my own outline here, but how are you developing advanced leaders in this global setting? What specifically are you doing? And I know that I was intrigued by the concept of the immersion, because I could think that cross-cultural immersion events would be powerful. So talk to us a little about your work in that quadrant.
So we've done these immersions in about 200 different cities, and mostly larger cities around the world. And so typically the people that are coming to them, say we just did one not too long ago in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. We had people coming from Africa, from obviously the North America, Europe, different parts of Asia. And so when they come, it's a disruption to everybody. So everybody's equally disrupted. Now, obviously, if somebody's coming from Singapore to Kuala Lumpur, the disruption is not as great as if they're coming from, Abuja or something like that. And so when they arrive, we've already done a lot of things online. And so they've already met each other, they've learned each other, about each other. So they're meeting at the airport and they're going, hey, you look taller than you did on Zoom, and we developed that relationship. So what's happening is they're being immersed, and the people who lead these immersions are the people that live there. They control it, they control the agenda, and we drive around on buses or whatever to their offices, to their place where they're serving in the community, to government leaders. Usually we meet with the mayor. And so what's happening is all of us are being disoriented by a new culture, but we're doing it with other people that their cultures are different than ours. So we typically would have kind of a theoretical thing that they've already done online. They're reminded of that in the morning. We do an immersion, best practices. Then after that, there's a group conversation. And it's interesting. So I may have seen the exact same thing, but somebody from South Africa would look at it and they saw something I didn't see. And by describing it, I go, oh, I didn't see that. I saw the same thing, but I didn't see it through your cultural eyes. And then we have at the night, they all journal. And the next morning they present kind of what they learned. And then we do it all over again. And so what ends up happening is you kind of have a double dose of cross-cultural. One is with the city that you're in. The second is with the people that you're with. And that has been really powerful. And we also create a non-shame based. So we say we're going to have cross-cultural mistakes. It will happen. And when it does, that's a learning opportunity. Don't be embarrassed. But you say that differently in different cultures. And so there's 3 meta narratives of culture. And so recognizing a meta narrative helps start a conversation, but if it stops the conversation, it's damaging. So meta narratives are helpful and bad as well. So the first meta-narrative of culture would be the West, which comes out of a Greek concept of individualistic, innocent guilt. And especially the individualistic piece is really driven in the United States. And so the idea is if you didn't like your neighbor, you just kept moving west in terms of, and didn't like that neighbor, you kept moving west. And so it's probably one of the most individualistic cultures that we've ever seen. But there was also some of that in Western culture. It also means in law, you are either guilty or innocent. When people describe their relationship with God, you're either guilty or innocent, and based upon what you've done. However, if you go to Asia, the meta narrative, and again, it has its limits, would be community, honor, shame. And so, and typically those cultures think not so much about me as an individual, but us as a community, my family, my ancestors, those that I'm working with. And so there's more of a community feel. But honor, shame is, if I make a mistake, it's not about me being innocent or guilty. I have shamed my face. and I have shamed my community. I've shamed my ancestors. But if I've done well, I've honored my faith. I've honored others. And so even the way legal systems work in an honor shame culture is very different. And so sometimes from the West, we're saying, well, if they did this crime, they should get this punishment. It's more about who did you shame, who is impacted by it, how did it hurt the community? And if it hurt the community more, there's much more punishment. And then the Africa meta-narrative is typically tribal power fear, and that can be really misunderstood. But there is a difference between community and tribal in that there's just an identity. This is my tribe. These are my people. And also the way authority is looked at is different in Africa. The authority is revered and revered and honored and respected differently than it certainly is in the West. But power fear is there's always an awareness of what's going on, and there's probably more awareness of the spirit. Spiritual things, forces beyond the material forces that typically come out of an African culture. There's things that you'd be afraid of, things that are both powerful, that are beyond you. And so the idea of how a culture works is who has the authority, who has the power. And what's happening that we don't see, or what's happening in other cultures, or what's happening in the spirit world beyond the material world that is fearful. And how do we address that? And so these meta narratives help us to begin a conversation. So when there's a cross-cultural mistake or a problem and conflict, and one of our students says something, the other student says that's offensive, then you say, okay, let's talk about it. Let's start with the meta narratives and go from there. And that happens every single class, every single day. It's just fun to watch, but we say, we know that's going to happen. So when it does, let's use that as a learning opportunity. If you feel offended, if you feel hurt, if you feel like, why would somebody say that? Ask, and let's try to explore that through their cultural norms. And as a result, it opens up our eyes for other people's cultures and perspectives.
Powerful stuff, Brad. Thank you for sharing that. I know I was writing notes, and I know many listeners will go back and say, I got to listen to that again with a notepad in front of me.
Well, be careful with meta narratives. They are helpful to start a conversation, but don't always like, oh, you're power shame.
No, don't use them as labels, but rather use them as an informed narrative of understanding. Because as you said, when you look at something from somebody else's perspective, and this is kind of what's happening in our little cross-cultural mastermind that we're running, we actually have hilarious conversations about our 4 different perspectives of the same scenario coming, as you said. So now you've given me a word for it. So I'll have to tell them to listen to this episode to understand meta narratives. But you also, I know, Brad, you're developing advanced leaders in this global setting who transform the 7 sectors of society. So why don't you talk to us a little about that? What are the 7 sectors of society that these leaders in turn are influencing?
So again, you could come up with 10, you could come up with 5. I mean, so the
pick your 7 flavors of the day, right?
Yeah, the 7 that are often shared, but they're not set in stone. Okay. And is first of all, family, because that is a core part of the sector of society. The second is we would call church or religion. Third would be education. Fourth would be business. Fifth would be government. The 6th would be arts. And the 7th is media and entertainment. And those are typically, and they're usually expressed kind of like that in that category. So here's what happens is often in education, people are siloed. So if somebody is being trained to be, so we have an MBA. So if somebody is trained to be a business leader, they only hang out with business people, right? And yet by hanging out with nonprofit people and NGO, the people in different sectors, and what ends up happening is they now are understanding that perhaps those people are wired and gifted and have experiences to express the social responsibility of what their nonprofit is trying to do, their NGO is doing. And yet the business people kind of understand how to build it in a more effective way. And so that cross-pollination helps both to grow at that. Churches, often pastors, don't really know how to empower their business people. And so we have them studying with each other, sharing ideas and with each other. And so what ends up happening is that cross-cultural allows them not to stay in their silos in their work, but to be transformational leaders where they move out and try to transform society in ways that may be crossing the silos.
Right. That's fascinating, Brad, because it also reminds me of the whole concept of, getting out of your echo chamber, which I'm always challenging people. So it's a similar concept, saying get out of your lane and go hang out with people different than you to develop your perspective. So that's powerful. The other thing I wanted to ask you is about your unique decision-making approach at BGU, and how you teach it and how you use it. If you want to sort of tell us about that. What does it mean? And I know you'll probably have another 3 or 5 bullets, people, so get your pens ready.
Well, I don't, so the thought. So,
and I say that with utmost respect, Brett.
So as you know, I grew up with management by objective. That was and Peter Drucker was a huge part of that. Peter Drucker was very formational in the organization where Kim and I formerly served, Leadership Network, Leadership Training Network. Peter mentored our leaders, mentored me. And management by objective is a particular style of saying the way we hold things together is there's a group typically at the top that says, these are the objectives we want this year. And then they dole out, this is your responsibility, this is your role to accomplish that. You have a quota toward that overall objectives. And so you're managing people in your team by, here's the big objectives, here's the objectives in your role. And so job descriptions, job clarification, measurement of objectives is very important. However, as we go more global, it's hard for people at the top to make those kind of decisions. And if you're in a environment like technology where things are changing so fast, by the time it gets up to the top and they come up with new objectives, you've already been beat out by another organization. And so what you see is there's a movement from management by objective to vision, values, or organic formed cultures or organizations. So one of our group that we are named after, Bakke Graduate University was named after a family that had the paradox of being in business, in nonprofit, in church, urban, and also a woman leader that was substantial around the world. They were all siblings. And so one of them is a guy named Dennis Bakke. So there was Ray Bakke, Dennis Bakke, Marilyn Bakke, Lowell Bakke. So, and they said, that's a great name because you're a paradox of trying to break down silos. This is a family that's been engaged in this. They actually have a family that has different groups. But Dennis Bakke started a electricity company that became the largest independently owned electricity company in the world. 40 billion market cap, 36,000 employees. And so he had a different style, more of an organic or vision values style. And the key to that is how you make decisions. There's other things that are part of it. So he wrote it up in a book called Joy at Work. And that book was a New York Times business bestseller in 2008. And then he wrote a more of a business fable called The Decision Maker. And the idea behind this is that and he also was quoted in the Wall Street Journal, and very controversial, saying, I'm the CEO of a company with 36,000 employees. I try to make one decision a year, okay? And that is who leads each region. After that, they make all the decisions and I support them, encourage them, help them, and give them advice. Now that's not exactly what happened, but that was his goal. And to try to say the flatten the organization to empower people on the front lines to make the most of the decisions that affect their work, because he believed if you train them and give them that power and hold them accountable in certain ways, they're going to make a lot faster decisions, better decisions. So it overcomes the problem with management by objective. It's not people at the top. You've got to get up to the top, tell them what's happening in your fast changing world, or try and explain to them what's happening in a global culture that they don't understand. What's happening is they have created vision and values, clarity, alignment by vision, boundaries around values, and then there's freedom inside of that for people to make decisions. So the Joy at Work book and that process allows us to align accountability, responsibility, and authority at the decision level as low down as possible. And the key is most people want authority, but they don't want accountability and responsibility. You've got to put all three together. And that means sometimes retraining people because the environment they were in, they're scared of the authority. They're scared of the responsibility, but they want the authority. And universities are some of the worst because faculty like to have authority, but not responsibility and accountability. And, changing that whole structure is how we've changed our organization, but that's also what we train. And And one of the ways we do that, and there's longer conversations, but we did this at Leadership Network. You remember, we trained this in LTN, so this is not new.
Yeah.
We said that in any decision, there is somebody that has veto authority. And usually it's somebody higher up on the org chart. And it's their job to veto it if it violates the vision and values of the organization. However, in my case, I'm the president of our school. Every time I veto somebody below me, I have to report that to my board. Okay. So I'm not going to do that unless I really have to. And if there's a vision and values violation, yes, I will veto it. But I don't want to do that a lot. Okay. And so what we're trying to do is get away from using veto authority a lot. The authority that's used a whole lot is point authority. And that's the person that is the single decision maker in a decision. Now that doesn't work. You go, oh my goodness, you need input. Well, then you have input authority. So anybody on their team has the right to give input to the point authority on that decision. And with that right, they must be told what the appointed person did with their input. And then finally, there's called information authority. If you're not on the team, you have the right to hear what the decision was made. So let's say you're I in a staff meeting. And so it starts off and I'm responsible for fundraising. And so I say, so the first agenda item is I have point authority about this particular fundraising event. And here's what I'm thinking about doing. Everybody on this team has input authority. What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? Okay, that's a good idea. I'm not going to do that idea. And here's the reason why. Okay, I need to learn more about that. Thank you for giving me that input and advice. Now I've got to go make the decision. I have the authority to make the decision, but I'm also going to be held accountable for it and be responsible for it. So now the next agenda item. Who is the boss of that agenda item? Who's the point authority? Kim, you're the point authority. It's a new training program. So now I may be president and you may be vice president, but now you're the boss of that meeting. You're the boss of me at that point, in that point authority. Now I have input to you. So let's say I really have a strong opinion. Yeah, I think you need to do it this way. And you don't. You say, I'm the boss of this decision, right? Yes, you are. And your opinion, you have an opinion, I've heard it, and I'm thinking this is this, but I'm not going to do it because of this, and this. I have to make a decision going, I want to do it my way. But I also go, you know what? It doesn't violate vision and values. And frankly, if she does it her way, she's going to have more energy and ownership. And I have to say, well, you've heard me. You've articulated, you heard my input. I am your boss on the org chart, but frankly, in this particular decision, you're the boss. And so therefore I submit to your decision. Now, notice how that shifted, and that would shift through the whole organization. You identify who has point authority, who has input authority, and trying to use veto authority as little as you possibly can. And the way you avoid that is by training people well, making sure vision and values are clear, and making sure you're measuring and demonstrating vision and values. And that helps that alignment. So in some cases, as a president, I may never hear the beginning of a violation of vision and values because it's being fixed in the teams down below, because they also know the vision and values and saying, we don't like that decision because it violates our values. And I may never have to enforce it because the team owns those vision and values, because my job is to articulate them well and help them to tell stories about vision and values. So it's not me just telling them, they actually have their own stories and they're enforcing them as much as I am.
Wow, mind blown. So I know a lot of leaders listening to this are going to be like, how the heck do I get from here to there? Because I think that it's a multifaceted shift, because not just retraining, but it's about hiring and it's about authority structures, and there's all kinds of things.
And trust.
Trust. Right. So if there's no trust, if there's a lot of fear and you've had a lot of silos going on, there's some heavy work to be done around the culture. But I think I, for one, would support that wholeheartedly. And I know that much of my work is towards that sort of values alignment, but not as deep. So I look forward to getting into that book and understanding more around that. And I know you and I'll have more discussions around that.
So my favorite book to start is actually not the first one. The Joy at Work is more the story of his company and his life and how this was formed. I think The Decision Maker it's a leadership fable. It's easier to access, and it's focused just on the decision-making process. Inside of The Joy at Work, the other book that got the bestseller, there's chapter 7, which I think is one of the best examples or statements of having an organization that has clarity of purpose. Because to create vision and values, you have to have clarity of purpose. And if anybody just says, I don't want to read all that, read The Decision Maker and read chapter 7 of Joy at Work. You're going to have a lot of the concepts.
Right. And Brad, tell us one more time his first name, the author.
It's Dennis
Dennis
His
Bakke.
last name is Bakke,
Yeah.
Bakke. The first book was Joy at Work. And then the second book was The Decision
The
Maker.
Decision Maker. Thank you. We'll make sure we put those links in the show notes. Brad, this has been amazing, and I've lost track of time, so I guess we should probably wrap up. But, I know you have a passion for graduate education, Brad, and what advice and encouragement would you give somebody who's listening to this, who is perhaps a graduate that has not followed through on the education? I'm so pleased to be done with school, and they jumped into corporate life and they never looked back. What would you say to somebody to give them some encouragement?
Sometimes in the United States, having a degree doesn't help your career as much as it would be in Africa, Asia, other places. And so a lot of it is not, it used to be just to have that degree to your name. Now, some cultures, and it obviously is very much more important. And in some business environments and certain environments, having that is there. I would say most cases, if the only reason you want to do graduate education is to have a title, I wouldn't say it's worth it in most cases. Now, that's going to be, people will push back on that in Africa and Asia. And so, but I'm coming from the West. However, if you're saying, I really want to accomplish, I want to stop and reflect on what I've learned and have a structure, a group of people to help me and to actually kind of reflect and actually engage what I've learned and actually take it to the next level, teach others, teach myself, stop and reflect and have a structure to do that. Our graduate degrees are designed for that. And so every person has a personal learning community so that they can customize their process. If you are more of an entrepreneur, don't go into a graduate program that has rails that you have to follow. It's really irritating. Try to find one. We have that, but there's others as well, that allows you to customize it in community with, we call it a personal learning community. And so our job is to not have you jump through our hoops, but for us to jump through the hoops that are determined by your calling and gift. But at the end, you're really saying, why do I want this? My primary reason is I want a structured way to accomplish what I want to do in my life. And this gives me that way to do that. There's other good reasons too. The degree is helpful. I see some people want to do it to demonstrate something to their children and grandchildren. And that's important in that culture or their culture. Other people just want to explore new things. They said, I really love the exploration. I don't know exactly what I'm going to get, but I just love exploring. And I find my mind needs to be stimulated. Those are all good reasons for a graduate degree. But I would say those are probably more important in my idea than just having the doctor title behind your name or in front of your name.
Right. Thanks for that, Brad. Great encouragement, and also a great pointing out of how different cultures would view it differently. So as I said, I feel like we could talk for another couple of hours, but as we round this out, I like to always end the interview, besides thanking you for your time, but also saying, as listeners kind of move on to the rest of their day after listening to this, what is one thing that you would like them to remember? Or perhaps two, because you've given us so many, but what is the one little nugget you want to make sure people remember about what we've spoken about today?
I think when you feel shame, identify it and say, I don't have to let this control me. This could be an opportunity for me to say, wow, I can learn new things. And when you see other people feeling shame, it's an opportunity to move in and say, it's okay. There's learning. Shame can keep us from being what God intended us to be. And being able to recognize it, name it, and be able to address it directly in ourselves and others is a pretty important part of growing to be what God and what our potential is.
Powerful, Brad. Thank you so much for making time in your busy day today, considering all the calls that you've had.
Well, thank you, Kim, for inviting me. It's really fun to be with you again after all these years.
Yeah, it's been great to be reconnected. So thank you so much. That's a wrap, listeners. We hope to see you next time. I know that you'll want to go back and listen to this episode more than once. So from the Rethink You podcast, we're going to say goodbye for now.